In the previous video, we've explored the transformation of scripture-seeking tales, from Zhu Bajie in the year 250 to Zhang's real-life pilgrimage, to the emergence of the white-robed scholar as Zang's companion, and the eventual transformation of this figure into a monkey. Through each retelling, the tale grew richer and more complex, undergoing a circularization of its religious themes into what we know today as Journey to the West, 西游记. Going into the Ming Dynasty, we have also pondered the precedents of the 100-chapter Tang version published in 1592, as well as the shorter Zhu and Yang versions. Regardless of who wrote it first, today we turn our attention to the 100-chapter 1592 compilation or novel, as it is the definitive telling of the story. And in this video, we will dive into its narrative, poetry, religious themes and character arcs. But before we proceed, something important about the characters' appearances. You see, even in my previous video, we've seen the disciples depicted as human-sized figures, and depictions in TV shows and illustrations even in the 1592 novel compilation similarly portray the disciples as human-sized. But the novel's description suggests something else, probably more like this. With Sha Wujing being more than 4 meters tall, Bajie about 3 meters, and Wukong roughly the size of an actual monkey. Plus, their heads are supposed to be shaved. So actually Wukong is bald on the top and looks like a Lei Gong, which he is called more than a few times. Truly terrifying for different reasons. Well, treat everything you see here as inaccurate. Their physical appearances aren't that relevant to the plot though, so I guess we'll just put this as details that the author changed but didn't stick in later adaptations. And with that out of the way, if there's a reason why we focus so much on Zhang's companion, it is that the 1592 novel significantly elevated Sun Wukong as a protagonist, almost to the point of bias and favoritism. I am positive that if the author is alive today, he would be one of those isekai writers dumping all of the OP abilities into the monkey. In earlier depictions, Sun Wukong, while formidable, was usually weaker than Lang Shen or Naja. The Yuan Dynasty Zhajü play Lang Shen captures the Great Sage equaling heaven, Lang Shen 所齐天大圣 is one such short play portraying Lang Shen decisively capturing the Great Sage, aside from some of the previous narratives we have already mentioned in the last video. But in the 1592 novel compilation, Sun Wukong dwelled Lang Shen to a standstill, and even when he had a chance to escape, he arrogantly decided to play around and impersonate Lang Shen at his temple. This then led to his eventual capture when Lao Tzu intervenes. Even in later chapters when Wukong struggled to gain the upper hand in fights and requires assistance from Guan Yin or other deities, the author ensures that the narrative emphasizes Wukong's superiority. These helping characters always explicitly instruct Wukong to lure out the enemy, but he is only allowed to lose and not win. It's basically the author telling us, well, the monkey can win and I want him to, but I'm only making him lose because the scenario calls for it. And as we discussed, 西游记 scenario has largely been fixed based on the previous iterations. Naturally, the story opens with the stone monkey's origins. Chapters 1 to 7 chronicle his rise, his birth from a stone, becoming king of Huaguo Mountain, learning the 72 transformations and immortality from Buti Zushi, and his expulsion for showing off his abilities in front of other disciples. Sun Wukong's arrogance leads him to disturb the Dragon Kings and obtain his iconic weapon and armor, then proceeding to quadruple his immortality by erasing his death record in the underworld, stealing and consuming celestial creatures, and stealing Lao Tzu's elixir pills, all before wreaking havoc in heaven and being imprisoned by Buddha under the Five Faces Mountain. But there are nuances and details in this 1592 version often lost in later adaptations. Huaguo Mountain, Flower Fruit Mountain, is not just a scenic paradise, but a primordial land filled with divine creatures, phoenixes, qilings, and dragons, alongside ever-bearing fruits and plants that never wither. So, yeah, when the 86 TV series budget allowance for a dragon is this, that can be a bit hard to include. And to tell us how much the author likes the monkey, The text even declares that Huaguo Mountain is indeed the pillar of heaven and the earth's great axis, two ways to tell us it is the center of this universe. The opening pages also establish the geography of the world, loosely aligning with Buddhist cosmology, which is centered around Mount Meru or Sumeru. However, as with how any modern author would play around with established mythologies, the author took creative liberties and shifted India westwards. China takes its place there. And, well, History 101. Note that I'm using India and China as a general name for that region. Back in the 8th century, that is certainly not their names, and the national boundaries were very different. Wukong's journey to find a Taoist master is also more arduous than depicted in adaptations. He wanders for 8 or 9 years, observing human society. And in less than a decade, he was able to note how most people are consumed by the pursuit of fame and wealth, while neglecting their spiritual well-being. For a stone monkey still fresh out of the mountain, this is to show us his affinity for spiritual cultivation. Another thing that is understated by later adaptations is how powerful Sun Wukong is. When he was fighting solo against the 4 great Devarajas, Li Tianwang and Nurja, dust from the battle darkened the cosmos and sent rocks flying across the planet. When fighting Shen, they both grew to 100,000 feet tall. The author spares no detail in illustrating these battles as cataclysmic, with gods literally towering into the stratosphere. When people say that Journey to the West is a Shen Mo, gods and demons fiction, they weren't kidding. Though note that phrases like this with a stupidly big number are usually meant to represent too big to be described, rather than taken literally. I'm just doing so cause it's fun. So another example would be Sun Wukong's ability to leap 108,000 li in an instant, which is roughly 50,400 kilometers. The Earth's circumference is roughly 4,075 kilometers. So taken literally, Wukong can circle the Earth slightly more than once in a single bound. Turns out, even back then, people were pretty good at estimating the Earth's circumference. But of course, Wukong isn't the only character, as much as the author wants this to be a one-man show. The pilgrim's journey isn't just about acquiring sacred scriptures, it's about the cultivation of flawed individuals into better people, camaraderie, and an unrelenting purpose. In chapter 8, Guan Yin chooses and meets the would-be disciples. In chapter 9, we're introduced to Zang, which covers his abandonment as a baby and the revenge plot surrounding his family. As noted in the previous video, this chapter is controversial and likely not part of the original narrative. Chapters 10 to 11 is about Emperor Taizong and his encounter with the Dragon King who got beheaded, and him going into the underworld and returning. Chapter 12 involves the selection of Zang as the pilgrim by Guan Yin, the review of his past life Jing Chanzi, Golden Cicada, a disciple of Buddha who was banished to incarnation in the human realm for not heeding Buddha's teachings, and Zang adopting the name Tang Zang for the 3 scriptures he is to collect, the Tripitaka. Then chapters 13 to 97 cover the pilgrimage, with chapters 13 to 22 roughly covering the recruitment of the 3 disciples and the White Dragon Horse. Bai Long Ma, the White Dragon Horse, not his actual name, is the second recruit in the party, even though he is usually overlooked and not considered a disciple. According to his words, he was originally a celestial dragon, the son of the Dragon King of the West Sea, Si Hai Long Wan Ao Run, who fell from grace after setting fire to the palace, burning the pearls within. His father brought him to the court of heaven, charging him for grave disobedience and being condemned to execution. But aside from this, in the 1592 work, there's barely any other indication of his background. We are not even given a name, and it's entirely possible that Bai Long Ma is simply a child. The death penalty for grave disobedience is going to seem unreasonable by modern moral standards, but that's just how the Tang dynasty people roll in the dynastic periods. What Bai Long Ma did is considered to be unfilial, which is number 7th on the 10 abominations, 12, which is a Confucian-influenced list. Guan Yin negotiated his pardon with the Jade Emperor, and in exchange, he is to be banished to the Eagle Grief Stream to await his role as San Zhang State. Bai Long Ma's initial encounter with the pilgrims was anything but peaceful. He devoured their horse, Although Wukong easily defeats him, the dragon hid in the river and refused to come out again. And this is where Wukong had no choice but to seek Guan Yin's guidance, and it's revealed that they were actually on the same team. Well, most of the journey the dragon remains a horse. In the aspect that his trial is being forced to be a horse despite being a dragon, it's basically an A+ score. But because of that, his presence is very low despite being the second recruit. Zhu Bajie, also known as Zhu Wuneng, is the third recruit. Once known as the Marshal of the Heavenly Reeds in the Heavenly River, Tianpeng Yuanshui. He got drunk and dallied with one of the Chang'es and was banished to the human realm. Unfortunately, he was reincarnated into a pig, and he then spent his days eating people as a Yao. As a pig Yao, he proved to have a sharp tongue when Guan Yin asked why he continued to eat people. He then unapologetically justified his actions by saying that if he cared about these laws or morality, he would have starved to death. But after promising to reform and join the pilgrimage, Guan Yin gave him the name Wuneng, meaning awakens to ability. Since then, he had stopped eating people. When the pilgrims encountered him in Gao village, Wuneng was accused of terrorizing the locals and holding a daughter of an established family captive. This Yao Guai initially came to them as a hardworking man, but eventually revealed himself to have a hawk-like appearance and such a great appetite that he ate much of their produce. So transforming into that young woman, Wukong also managed to get Wuneng's side of the story. Well, there's a lot of he said, she said in the story here. It's certainly true that Wuneng was holding the daughter captive when the pilgrims visited, but according to him, his appearance and marriage was something that the family had agreed upon from the start. In fact, since their marriage, the family had grown a lot in wealth, certainly more than what he can eat. Note that since Wuneng didn't know that it was Wukong in disguise, it's unlikely that he is lying here. And one inconsistency with the family statement is that a simple divorce would have been enough given the situation, but the family is seeking for someone to kill him. In any case, since then, Wuneng had followed the promise to adhere to a vegetarian diet. Hence, Zang gives him the name Bajie. Bajie literally means 8 prohibitions. This in the novel is the 5 forbidden viands: leeks, garlic, onion, green onion and scallion, and the 3 undesirable foods: wild goose, dog and blackfish, which you can understand to be poultry, meat and fish. In Buddhism, Bajie is also the 8 things you shouldn't do as a Buddhist: killing, stealing, sexual immorality, lying, alcohol, excessive personal comfort, excessive entertainment, and eating out of regular hours, which I would say in the journey he didn't manage to follow any except the entertainment part. Bajie in the journey is shown to have a tendency for acting on impulse, consistently being lazy and lacking discipline to control his lust or appetite. He's also usually the first to run in the face of danger. While Bajie's background after being banished is pretty unlucky and tragic, the story is also pretty inconsistent. For example, one might think that Bajie being reincarnated as a pig is a curse that changed him into a man-eating monster. But in chapter 85, while boasting to a Yao Guai, Bajie gave a summary of his life story. Take a look at the first sentence. With huge mouth and fangs, I've great magic might. Isn't that what a wild pig looks like? It's not a confirmation, but if true, then it means he looked like a pig even as a celestial. And he said he commanded 80,000 marines, but yet when Sun Wukong was facing off against 100,000 heavenly soldiers or wreaking havoc in heaven, this marshal was nowhere to be found. So unless the author simply forgot, based on the characterization we see in the novel, it's likely that Bajie is just boasting and much of his background is made up. Sha Wujing is the 4th and last recruit. Like Bajie, Sha Wujing was originally a celestial general serving in heaven, this time the curtain-raising general, Jianlian Dajiang. But because he broke a cup, he got banished to the flowing sand river and was transformed into a monster. Every 7th day, the Jade Emperor sends a flying sword to stab him. With the hunger and cold being unbearable, he eats a traveller every few days for sustenance. By the way, I just remembered something. 1 day in heaven is 1 year on earth. So I just did the math and it's half an hour in heaven for every 7 days on earth. So Does this mean that every half an hour the Jade Emperor will just abandon all he is doing just to send one sword flying to Sha Wu Jing? Anyway, unlike Ba Jie, Wu Jing showed remorse when confronted by Guan Ying about eating people, and this is where Guan Ying gave him the name Sha Wu Jing, awakened to purity. But while Sha Wu Jing seemed more obedient, he still continued eating people until he met the pilgrims. Though, I guess to be fair, Guan Ying forgot to give him a source of food. So you might be confused by the last sentence. He never took life again, but waited attentively for the arrival of the scripture pilgrim. This is a classic case of author forgot or another inconsistency that arises because there may be more than one author. Because in chapter 22, while Tang Zang, Ba Jie and Wu Kong were still wondering how to cross the river, Sha Wu Jing went straight at San Zang. That's not an action taken by someone who stopped killing. But otherwise, Sha Wu Jing's presence in the journey is also pretty low, generally following what the group does and doing anything required without complaints. His greatest importance is in being the mediator in the group and providing quiet support. Aside from Wu Kong, the 4 other pilgrims have very little confirmed backstories. In the case for San Zang, removing chapter 9 would make his background story perhaps even more sparse than the other characters. And that's just how the 1592 CEOG is. It's certainly not perfect. With the introduction done, let's understand the main narrative of Journey to the West. The bulk of COT is rather episodic, presenting ordeals as the pilgrims traverse treacherous landscapes, mountains, gorges, remote monasteries, and bustling cities. These ordeals typically span 1 to 4 chapters and revolve around Tang Zang's perilous journey, where he becomes the target of both Yao Guai and humans. With his fabled backstory of being the reincarnation of Golden Cicada, many believe eating or sleeping with San Zang will give them immortality. And you'll find that a lot of scenarios feel like repeats of the same thing, with the main difference being how the group approaches the ordeal. As the story progresses, they manage to confront scenarios more effectively. The ordeals typically involve Wu Kong warning the group about imminent danger, which Tang Zang disregards because of his dogmatic attitude towards morality or influenced by Zhu Bajie's bad advice. Sha Wu Jing will try to make peace, and the white dragon horse stays silent because horses don't talk. Predictably, San Zang gets captured. Wu Kong goes on a rescue mission, and the other disciples are either captured or just chilling around and feeling helpless. Sometimes, these Yao Guai that appear will prove to be extremely powerful or wield celestial relics that cause Wu Kong to be unable to handle them. Usually, these Yao Guai will turn out to be celestial beings or escaped deities with stolen relics, requiring intervention from their original masters or higher beings in heaven. Then, Wu Kong will find these masters. That celestial being helps them capture the Yao Guai, and the crew continues on with the journey. Something to note here is that Zhu Bajie and Sha Wu Jing, despite their heavenly origins, and they had probably spent longer time in heaven than Wu Kong, they never contribute to solving these by seeking people they know. If that isn't a clue that their posts aren't as high as they said, I don't know what is. It also tells us that as powerful as Sun Wukong is, networking and connections is the real superpower. Tang Zang being the golden example of getting those sweet divine favors. Anyway, the notable chapters that most people will remember are Chapter 16, the Hei Xiong Jing, Black Bear Jing, stealing the Kazaya at a Guanyin monastery. Chapter 20, the Yellow Wind Guai, Huang Feng Guai. Chapter 23, Bodhisattvas turning into women to seduce the pilgrims. Predictably, only Zhu Bajie fell for it. Chapter 24, the pilgrims meeting Zhen Yuanzi, the patriarch of all Earth's immortals, and then proceeding to steal his ginseng fruit. Chapter 27, the Bai Gu Jing, White Bone Jing, where she turned into a human 3 times to deceive the group. Each time Wu Kong kills her, but Tang Zang kicks Wu Kong out, convinced that she was innocent. The group then falls apart and Tang Zang gets captured. Chapter 40, Hong Hai the Red Boy, who pretends to be a normal child in distress, and Tang Zang getting kidnapped again. Chapter 56. Tang Zang kicks out Wukong again over some robbers Wukong killed. And while Wukong is gone, the Liu Miho, the 6-year macaque, impersonates him and sow discord in the group. Chapter 59. The Flaming Mountains, where Wukong had to borrow the Pa Jiao Shan palm leaf fan to quell the blazing mountains. Along with that, they, or rather Wukong, had to deal with Liu Mo Wang, Bull Demon King. Chapter 72. Pan Si Dong, Pan Si Cave, where they encounter the 7 spider Jings. Chapter 74. Shi Tuo Ling, Lion Camel Ridge, where they encounter 3 powerful Yao Guais. So, those looking for potential Black Myth sequels, well, it appears most of the memorable ones were covered, so there's not much meat left. So you might ask, what's the difference between Yao, Guai, Jing, and all those nonsense? Nowadays, there are probably ways to differentiate them into the categories of what they do and what they look like. Yao would be anything that has supernatural power. Mo would be similar to demons. Gui are ghosts. Guai would be anything strange, while Jing would be like spirits. But at least in the 1592 novel, anybody who harms human will be considered a Yao Mo Guai or Jing, and if the same person does good, they become a Xian and immortal. And that's it really. Just look at any of the pilgrim disciples. For instance, Sun Wukong was a Yao Guai when ruling Hua Guo Mountain, but by simply receiving a heavenly post, he became a Xian. During the pilgrimage, he is a monk and ultimately ascended to Buddha status after completing the journey. The changes were in title, not form. Yao, Xian, or monk is simply a label, much like the labels like criminal, hero, or employee. There is no physical change in the character itself. And finally, the chapters 98 to 100. After a long journey of 14 years, we see the pilgrims receiving the scriptures. Sun Wukong and Tang Zang achieve Buddhahood. Sha Wujing becomes an Arhat. Bai Longma is promoted to be one of the 8 legions of Devas and Nagas. And Zhu Bajie becomes an outer cleaner who consumes leftover offerings. So there's something interesting about Zhu Bajie's post here. In the conversation with Buddha, Bajie is obviously unhappy about being an outer cleaner. The scenario suggests that Bajie has the lowest rank among the 5 pilgrims. But in the last 2 pages, where the Holy Congregation of Heaven chanted as the 5 pilgrims assumed their positions as newly appointed sages, the chant begins from the assumed highest rank, the Buddhas, and of course, Sanzang and Wukong are there, being the last 2 in the list of Buddhas. Then comes the Bodhisattvas, the Pusas, and the last 3 names are Jingtan Shizhe Pusa, janitor of the altars Bodhisattva, that is Zhu Bajie, Ba Bao Jingshen Luohan Pusa, golden-bodied Arhat of 8 treasure Bodhisattva, that is Sha Wujing, and Ba Bu Tianlong Guangli Pusa, heavenly dragon of 8 legions Bodhisattva, that is the white dragon horse. So going against the scenario, the ending chant elevated Bajie above Sha Wujing and Bai Longma, despite Bajie's sabotage and misdeeds during the journey. Sha Wujing, who was named an Arhat in the conversation, is suddenly now a Bodhisattva as well. And if you remember the debate in the previous video about authorship, then it's obviously possible that the chant was added by the publishing house or someone else. There's a lot of nuance in what a Bodhisattva means because every school of Buddhism has different interpretations of what being a Bodhisattva means. 西游记 doesn't explicitly say what they think a Bodhisattva means, but at least based on the narrative, we understand that it is just one step of enlightenment down from Buddhahood. And well, it's just my opinion, but based on reading the 100 chapters, I don't think Bajie was supposed to be a being of higher enlightenment. But for now, let's discuss the poetry in the novel. Much like the history of scripture-seeking narratives, the poetry in 西游记 reflects the influence of Buddhist literature on Chinese storytelling. One key precedent lies in the 辩文, transformational texts that blend prose and verse for oral and visual storytelling. 《西游记》incorporates a wealth of original poetry that fully utilizes this kind of technique. What with forms like the Jiajing, the 律诗, 排律, 词, 赋 that honestly I can't fully understand or appreciate. But if even Anthony Yu, the writer of the English translation I'm using alongside the modern Chinese translation, remarks that a thorough explanation of the poetry would require a section longer than his current introduction that ends at page 168, I guess I don't have to feel too bad about not fully understanding anything. What it means is that it would be nearly impossible to translate these poems into English given the inherent rhythm, structure, and layers of meaning in the language. So take for example in chapter 1, describing the frolic of the monkeys. 跳树攀枝采花蜜果抛担子挖妹儿 Translated into English, swinging from branches to branches, searching for flowers and fruits. They played 2 games or 3, with pebbles and with pellets. While we understand what happens in the scene, it's just not the same without the rhythm and melody of the original. Prose like this is used to describe everything from scenery and seasons to battles, and even dialogues or commentary. For example, in chapter 14 verses 18, similar poetic structures emphasize the passage of time and changes in the environment. In chapter 14, describing early winter, 双雕红叶千灵兽 岭上几株松柏秀 Frost-blighted maples and the wizened trees. Few verdant pine and cypress still on the ridge. Versus chapter 18, when Sun Wukong recovered the lost Kazaya, describing spring, 草趁玉葱啼寄卵 柳摇金线露华星 The horse making light tracks on grassy turfs. Gold threads of willow swaying with fresh dew. The English versions communicate the imagery but not the rhythm, melodic flow, or deeper connotations. In the original Chinese, these poems echo each other through their structure, both 7 words followed by 7 words, and use of seasonal imagery, reinforcing the pilgrim's journey across both time and space. But even during the period it was written in, "西游记"'s poetry is considered to be an inferior form, just one reason why it was written anonymously. In that era, subtlety, metaphor, and philosophical depth were favoured, and the bluntness of its verses may have seemed unsophisticated. Yet, in the context of the novel, this simplicity serves an epic purpose. The poems function as a narrative device to highlight the passage of time, the vastness of the journey, and the changing environments. The cumulative effect is far greater than the individual artistry, making the story feel larger than life while grounding it in minute details. The author also uses poetry to inject humour and irony, often targeting religion. For instance, in chapter 67, a village elder recounts a monk's failed attempt to defeat a python Yao Guai. One stroke brought forth a punch, one stroke delivered a scratch. The monk tried hard to respond. In response, he had no hair. The Chinese for the 3rd and 4th line highlighted are 和尚还相应,相应没头发. So this is a pun on 3 levels. 相应法 is a Buddhist doctrine referring to a teaching about the correspondence of the mind-heart with your senses, reason, process, object, and time. But 相应 is also the words to mean respond, as in reacting to the attack. And then 法 as in 相应法 sounds like the 发 in hair, 头发. So a monk without hair, 发, doesn't have the 法 to respond. So on the surface, it's saying that the monk isn't of high level and thus couldn't deal with the attack. And a secondary level, it's laughing at monks for not having hair. This isn't to say that 西游记 only pokes fun at religion. If anything, the work is pretty respectful to all 3 teachings. Some of the texts will quote verbatim from various texts, such as the opening line of chapter 87, derived from 明和余音, a Quanzhen Taoist text. And at times, these quotes would be altered to fit the story's context. While we often use the term religion to describe systems like Buddhism, Taoism, and Confucianism, It's important to note that Eastern religions differ fundamentally from Western religions. Western traditions often center around faith, scripture, and principles, emphasizing a relationship with a higher being. In contrast, Eastern religions lean towards philosophy and self-discipline, focusing on the pursuit of inner harmony, rather than an external deity. Outside versus inside. Confucianism further complicates this dichotomy. Known in Chinese as 儒学, which translates to the study of being a scholar, inherently frames it as a practice of learning rather than a religion. And while traditions like Christianity and Buddhism are classified outright as religions, Confucianism can't be categorized as simply. Wikipedia, for example, describes Christianity and Buddhism as religions directly in the first sentence, but Confucianism is a tradition, philosophy, religion, theory of government, or way of life. So whereas a religion like Christianity might use words like faith or belief, the equivalent word in Eastern religions is perhaps 修行, translated as cultivation or spiritual practice. You are trying to cultivate yourself into a better person. I would prefer to call them philosophies, but in any case, whatever you want to call them. In the context of the 1592 COT, when we discuss these religions, I am mainly talking about the branch that would be practiced at the time. For Buddhism, this would be Chan Buddhism, which came to be as Mahayana Buddhism absorbed Confucian, Taoist, and folk religious influence. And for Taoism, this would be Quanzhen Taoism, which also incorporates some thoughts from Chan Buddhism and Confucianism. Then we have Neo-Confucianism, which also borrowed terms and concepts from the other two religions. And you can already see how three teachings in harmony, 三教合一, is ideal given how they blend ideas. But because of the tale's masterful writing, popularity and references to texts from the three teachings, later commentators have tried to claim COT as a manual for either Buddhist, Taoist, or Confucian self-cultivation in the centuries following. Hu Shi, a prominent 20th century scholar, criticized these readings, stating, COT for these several centuries has been ruined by countless Taoists, monks, and Confucians. The Taoists said this book is a volume of wondrous formulas for the golden elixir. The monks said this book is about the method of mind cultivation in the gate of Chan. The Confucians said this book is one on the principles of rectifying the mind and rendering sincere the will. These interpretations are the great adversaries of COT. While it's hard to agree that COT has been ruined given that these types of religious readings are not that commonly read today, the comment illuminates why Hu Shi was frustrated to the point of writing in Arthur Waley's translation, Monkey is simply a book of good humor, profound nonsense. But regardless of the scholarly discussions, I believe most casual readers might assume COT has a preference for Buddhism. After all, the story revolves around retrieving Buddhist scriptures. Buddha subdues Wukong in heaven, and many antagonists along the way claim to be Taoist. But actually, COT's preference is pretty clear when we only look at the presented text. It prefers the three teachings in harmony. Right at the start of chapter 2, when Wukong's master Wu Ti Zu Shi, the patriarch sub-Bodhi, was lecturing, the text explicitly writes that the patriarch for a while lectured on Tao, then for a while spoke on Chan. To harmonize the three parties is a natural thing. And this attempt at harmonization is also illustrated throughout the narrative. A key example would be in the events of the slow-cut kingdom, Che Chi Guo, running from chapter 43 to the start of chapter 47. In this kingdom, Buddhist monks have been enslaved and monasteries defunded under the influence of Taoist advisors. These Taoist masters, who gained the king's trust by ending a drought with a magical weather-controlling tablet, are later revealed to be three Yao Guais in disguise. And at the conclusion of the arc, Sun Wukong explicitly tells the king that hereafter you should never believe foolishly in any doctrine that comes along. I hope you will honor the unity of the three teachings, revere the monks, revere also the Taoists, and take care to nurture the talented. Your kingdom, I assure you, will be secure forever. As the author's favourite character, Wukong often serves as the mouthpiece for the author's ideal, and here the explicit ideal is the unity of the three teachings. And this kind of Taoist Yao Guai antagonists are actually pretty common throughout the novel. On the surface, it looks like a criticism for Taoism, but they actually represent a specific type of Taoist, the unorthodox Taoists who obsess on external alchemy, creating physical elixirs and pills rather than the internal alchemy, the cultivation of the mind. Hey, it's the exact type of Taoist priest that Emperor Jiajing liked during his reign from 1521 to 1567, which also happens to be the period that COT was probably written, almost as if the author was criticizing something. Jiajing was infamous for being obsessed with immortality, heavily patronizing Taoists practicing external alchemy and seeking elixirs or pills. He even plans to isolate himself to focus on these pursuits, sparking concerns among his officials. Those who openly criticized him were executed, of course, a most reasonable response from an enlightened emperor. Though as it turns out, consuming pills and elixirs made from substances like arsenic and mercury would poison him and deteriorate his health. And the critique of Jiajing is made more explicit in chapter 93 when the pilgrims reach a prosperous kingdom further west in India. The text paints a vivid picture of the city as a prosperous, blessed land, with the citizens at peace with abundant food. As a clerk welcomed the pilgrims, he explains that their current emperor has been reigning for 28 years since the Jing banquet, Jing Yan. In imperial China, Yan Jia, two words literally peaceful and drive, or sometimes with the Yan changed to the banquet, Yan, was used as an euphemism for the death of an emperor. So, the text literally tells us that the kingdom is prosperous after the Jing emperor was sent off with a banquet, aka unalived. Yeah, no wonder the author wrote this anonymously. And just to add one more reason why the author would want anonymity, let's take a look at an example of the author fanning the flames a little. In chapter 6, where Sun Wukong battles Erlang Shen, as Guanyin Bodhisattva and Lao Tzu discuss helping Erlang, Lao Tzu remarks, "The year when I crossed the Hanggu Pass, I depended on it a great deal for the conversion of the barbarians." This statement references the theory of Hua Hu Wei Fo, the conversion of the barbarians into Buddhists, a narrative that claims Lao Tzu travelled west, became the Buddha, and civilized the Hu people, which is a term used for non-Han ethnic groups, thereby implying that Buddhism is a spin-off of Taoism. So, yeah, a little casual racism and putting Taoism more than Buddhism in the text here. Although, I suppose we could also read this as the three religions or philosophies being fundamentally the same. But I think the author's thoughts on religion are summed up pretty well in later chapters. In chapter 91, the pilgrims arrive at an outer prefecture of India. When Zang mentions that he is from Tang, an Indian monk immediately kneels in reverence, explaining that virtuous Buddhists in India aspire to be reincarnated in the land of China because of its noble endowments. Yet, Zang replies that Indians are truly blessed to be able to enjoy a quiet and comfortable existence here. The irony is that the pilgrims have undertaken a grueling journey to seek spiritual truth in India, only to be told that the Indians idealize China for its material wealth. This is the author telling the reader that the grass is always greener on the other side. Indians admire China for its material wealth, and the Chinese admire India for its spiritual wealth. And that's just how people are. This satisfaction often stems from romanticizing what others have and overlooking one's own blessings. Nearing the end of chapter 99, the pilgrims successfully obtain the scriptures and begin their return journey on clouds. However, Guanyin Bodhisattva counted the number of ordeals and found that, they still left one more ordeal to be 81. Like tee-hee, as if they haven't engineered half the ordeals. And she decided to orchestrate another one by stopping the cloud taxi and dumps the pilgrims on the ground. This forces them to cross a river, during which portions of the scriptures were damaged or lost. One part, this makes up the real-life law explaining why the real-life scriptures were incomplete, and one part for the author's self-insert reply by Wukong, After all, even heaven and earth are not perfect. This sutra may have been perfect, but a part of it has been torn off precisely because only in that condition will it correspond to the profound mystery of non-perfection. Translation: perfection is neither achievable nor necessary, as even heaven and earth are not perfect. Slightly later in the chapter, the pilgrims encounter villagers who have built temples and statues in their honor, attributing their prosperity since building the temples to the pilgrims' blessings. And here, Wukong dismisses their gestures and says that it's got nothing to do with them. That's just the natural good topography here. The author's idea for religion is illustrated and written down explicitly here. Clay statues are meaningless. The greatest reward for the pilgrims in their journey isn't having a new master or religious title. It's not the scriptures, it's not the immortality pills, nor is it the religious offerings they will get from people. Religion, at its core, is about personal cultivation. These external symbols of faith are ultimately secondary to the inner journey of self-improvement. You can believe in religion if you want, but don't blindly follow its rituals or doctrines. Even divine teachings are imperfect. True wisdom lies in embracing this imperfection rather than striving for an unattainable ideal. Something form is emptiness, emptiness is form, which I'm not going to explain since I don't fully understand it either. But for the purpose of viewing COT as a circular text promoting the three teachings in harmony, the substance of religion or philosophy lies not in its external forms, but in its ability to inspire self-cultivation. I mean, think about it. If the objective is just to deliver the scriptures, then there is no need for a pilgrimage. Sun Wukong can just hop there, take it, then hop back. Going on foot and experiencing the ordeals is the whole purpose. Yes, it's that true treasure meme, 16th century China version. True enlightenment can only come from within. And it doesn't matter if you are following Buddhism, Taoism, or Confucianism. These only serve as guides for you to walk your own path. As long as you go through these ordeals, even if you are Yao Guai, you can achieve transcendence. In COT, each of the 5 characters represents an abstract aspect of a person: the mind, the body, will, desire, and nature. Sun Wukong, our main character, and the Xing Yuan, the mind monkey, as I explained in the previous video. Please watch it if you want an explanation for his name as well. Obviously, he is the mind. The imagination, creativity, and power of the mind can lead to infinite possibilities, but they must be controlled to avoid chaos or misdirection. Hence, in the story, he is the one who comes up with the ideas and leads the group. His ingenuity and quick thinking are invaluable in overcoming challenges, reflecting the critical role of the mind in navigating life's trials. From the perspective that cultivation is about achieving inner balance and calming the mind, Wukong's allegory is perhaps the most important. As the core of the group, Tang Zang is the human body, fragile and limited. Unlike the immortals in the party, Zang is human, so he is more susceptible to hunger, fatigue, and physical danger. His vulnerability requires constant support from the others, just like the body needs to be met to sustain the mind, will, and spirit. Regardless of lofty ideas or strong willpower, the body sets the boundaries within which all else operates. Bai Long Ma, the white dragon horse, embodies the will and perseverance. Yi, the wheel horse Yi Ma in Xing Yuan Yi Ma. As the mount that physically carries the body, he represents the determination to move forward step by step toward a goal. This is explicitly referenced in the title of chapter 15. Zhu Ba Jie, with his insatiable appetite for food, sex, comfort, indulgence, represents human desire. Desire, when unrestrained, can interfere with the mind's plans and slow progress, as seen in Zhu Ba Jie's frequent distractions and missteps. However, desire also motivates and drives action. The mind must work creatively, often tricking or coaxing desire into alignment with higher goals, as Wukong does with Ba Jie on numerous occasions. Sha Wu Jing, represents the humble and kind aspects of human nature. He is the steady, hardworking disciple who keeps the group grounded. He also serves as a peacemaker, fostering harmony among the group members, smoothing over conflicts and preventing divisions. But on the other hand, he's got no strong opinions and lack initiative. While essential for balance, human nature must be paired with action and ambition to achieve growth. And there are also interpretations that link the pilgrims to the 5 phases, the Wu Xing of Chinese philosophy. 5 pilgrims, Wu Xing Zhe, has the same Wu Xing words here, and the text also tells us that Sun Wukong represents metal, that Zhu Bajie represents wood, and Sha Wu Jing represents earth. It's certainly not definitive, but they do offer that additional layer of meaning. What's really important here is that personal cultivation requires the balance of all 5 aspects: mind, body, will, desire, and nature. The pilgrimage itself is a metaphor for the process of self-improvement. Yao Mo Gui Guai Jing, the demons, are said to be born from the mind, and that's why they're also subdued by the mind during the journey. Neglecting or overemphasizing any one part of the body disrupts the harmony needed for growth and success. This interplay between characters reinforces the idea that success requires not just strength or intellect, but a holistic integration of all parts of the self. That said, these are not perfect interpretations, and I don't think they are meant to be. Just treat them as something extra to think about. Tickle your brain. And with that, let's understand how our characters grew in the journey. Sun Wukong's growth is the most extensive. His journey is one of learning restraint and discipline, transforming from a rebellious troublemaker to a disciplined being. Given the repetitive nature of the ordeals, this growth is exemplified through the comparison and contrast of various encounters, which, in this case, we will use his interactions with robbers along the way as an example. In chapter 14, shortly after the release from the 5 Phases Mountain, Wukong and San Zang encounter 6 robbers on the road. San Zang, having yet to witness Wukong's abilities, was so terrified that he fell off the horse. Wukong, however, treats this situation as playtime. He demands the robbers hand over the treasures they've robbed and taunts them, urging them to strike him for 70 or 80 times. After effortlessly withstanding their attacks, Wukong kills the robbers and took their belongings. San Zang, horrified, immediately scolds him. He argues that if Wukong is so powerful, he could have simply chased the robbers away. So here's the thing, while San Zang's logic may appear moral, the last 2 sentences reveal a more self-serving motive. He fears being implicated in the robber's death. His reprimand is less about ethics and more about protecting his own reputation. And we have to also consider that even by modern moral standards, Wukong's action can be seen as justifiable. The bandits were completely prepared to commit murder, and it is likely that they had done so before. In today's legal system, Wukong might have to face scrutiny for manslaughter. But in the Tang dynasty, he will likely be celebrated as a hero. And obviously, Wukong himself was supposed to be executed after wreaking havoc in heaven. So it's not like even heavenly beings are against killing in the right circumstances. So San Zang's anger is really rooted in ego rather than true morality. That said, if Wukong truly wishes to convert to Buddhism, he must strive to avoid killing whenever possible. San Zang points out that Wukong's lack of self-control is the very reason he was imprisoned under the mountain for 500 years. However, since Wukong had never been scolded in his entire life, he angrily flew away in defiance. Here is where Guan Yin gave San Zang the tight fillet spell and a cap. Meanwhile, rather than returning to Hua Guo Mountain, Wukong visits the Dragon King of the Eastern Ocean. And after some tea and a short conversation with the Dragon King, Wukong reflects on his actions, realizes his mistake, and promptly returns to San Zang. Though Wukong is repentant, San Zang deceives him into donning the cap, which transforms into the golden headband. San Zang then immediately recites the tight fillet spell, causing Wukong immense pain. In his rage, Wukong even tries to kill San Zang. However, the spell grants San Zang a measure of control over Wukong, marking a turning point in their dynamic. From a modern ethical perspective, this is clearly just enslavement. But in allegorical terms, the spell serves as a symbolic limit, ensuring that the mind monkey's boundless potential does not spiral out of control. It emphasizes the importance of discipline. The mind must be free to explore and grow, but it also must operate within boundaries to prevent chaos. But after the first incident with the robbers, Wukong and San Zhang's relationship continued to deteriorate. As they recruited more members for their journey, Wukong's indispensable contributions became apparent to everyone. While San Zhang was nominally the leader, Wukong's problem-solving abilities and strength made him the de facto driving force of the group. But because of this dynamic shifted the group's center of power over time. San Zhang would cast Wukong out of the group, only to ultimately rely on Wukong again due to the difficulty of the ordeals. And as Wukong's importance grew, so did Wukong's ego. And the next time they meet robbers is in chapter 56. In the chapter, Zhu Bajie, being hungry and impatient, prodded the white dragon horse to go forward. The horse refuses, and Wukong, initially content to walk slowly, becomes playful as Bajie complains. He waves his rod, causing the horse to gallop 20 miles ahead together with San Zhang. And when the horse stopped, San Zhang finds himself surrounded by 30 or so robbers around the area. Being just a little bit braver than before, he pleads with the robbers, trying to reason with them to show kindness. But the robbers started beating him. Fearing that Wukong will kill the robbers if he appears too injured, San Zhang started to lie and claim that his young disciple should be arriving soon with some money. When the other three arrive, they find San Zhang hanging from a tree. Wukong tells the other two to stay back and approaches alone, transforming into a young monk. Pretending to offer the robbers money, Wukong persuades the robbers to release San Zhang, who promptly flees on the horse and abandons Wukong. The bandits then surround Wukong, demanding the promised money. While chuckling, Wukong reveals that he has none, and suggests that the robbers share their loot instead. As before, Wukong allows the robbers to attack him harmlessly, but instead of retaliating immediately, he offered them his Ruyi Jinggu Bang, saying that they can keep it if they can lift it. Of course, no ordinary human can lift 13,500 pounds, but for some reason, one of the bandit chiefs decided that hitting Wukong another 50 or 60 times was a good idea. Only then does Wukong retaliate, laughing as he kills two of the bandits and scaring the rest into fleeing. So at least compared to the first encounter, Wukong shows more restraint here. He gives the robbers multiple chances to abandon their crime, and in self-defense only killed two bandits who provoked him repeatedly. However, the bandits later foolishly return seeking revenge. This time, San Zhang explicitly instructs Wukong to only frighten them away. But Wukong disregards San Zhang's wishes entirely, killing most of them. Unlike in chapter 14, Wukong was truly uncontrolled this time. Wukong even presents the severed head of one of the robbers to San Zhang, frightening him further. So this is where San Zhang recited a tight fillet spell again, forcing Wukong to submission before expelling him from the group for a second time. This separation would then create an opening for further discord. A cunning imposter, the 6-year macaque, Liu Mihou, assumes Wukong's identity, then leading to chaos among the group. Ultimately, this issue was resolved in front of Buddha, who identifies the real Wukong and allows Wukong to defeat and kill the imposter. Guan Yin then served as mediator to remind Wukong and San Zhang of their mutual need for one another. Where it relates to Wukong's character growth is in the text where Buddha explains the 4 kinds of monkeys that do not fit into the 5 kinds of immortals and 5 kinds of creatures, Wu Chong, which were the traditional Chinese categories for classifying animals. The 4 monkeys are the stone monkey, that is Wukong, the red-buttocked baboon and bare-armed gibbon, both which are Wukong's 4 generals in Huaguo Mountain, and the 6-year macaque, that is the false Wukong in chapters 56 to 58. While these 4 types of monkeys are real characters in the novel, the description given by Buddha also parallels Wukong's character arc. The stone monkey, Ling Ming Shihou, represents Wukong's birth and his time in Huaguo Mountain. The red-buttocked baboon, Chikao Ma Hou, symbolizes his journey into human society and learning the ways of immortality from 菩提祖师. The bare-armed gibbon, 通背猿猴, reflects Wukong's havoc in heaven. The 6-ear macaque, 六耳猕猴, symbolizes Wukong's learning when he believes he has mastered everything. However, this knowledge also leads to arrogance and attachment, preventing his spiritual enlightenment. That is the case when the uncontrolled mind monkey pushes the horse forward and ignores his master's pleas to not kill the robbers. Wukong's act of recognizing his mistake and killing the 6-ear macaque marks his triumph over his Xing, his half-heartedness, and his Xingmo, mind or inner demons. This is written in the title of chapter 58. Two minds cause disorder in the great cosmos. It's hard for one body to realize true nirvana. In the context of viewing 西游记 as a book about self-cultivation, this means that distractions caused by acquired knowledge or attachment to one skill can hinder spiritual growth. To achieve true enlightenment, one must be single-minded in their goal and avoid being half-hearted. It's not a coincidence that Niu Mo Wang, the Bull Demon King, is in the next arc. Described in the passage as 牛王本是心猿变, for Bull King in fact was from mind monkey changed. Niu Mo Wang is, like the 6-ear macaque, an alternate version of Wukong. In older Buddhist branches in India, the bull was often used as a symbol for the mind, just as the monkey represents it in Journey to the West. In early iterations of 西游记 stories, before 1592, the Flaming Mountain story was already well known, although the Iron Fan Princess did not have a husband then. The Bull Demon King was an addition by the author, often referred to as 大力王, the King Powerful. This is a title previously associated with Sun Wukong in other versions of 西游记 called 大力王菩萨, the Bodhisattva King Powerful. The Bull Demon King in the story is greedy, lustful, and consumed by worldly desires. In the novel compilation, he abandons Iron Fan Princess to marry Princess Jade Countenance, promising protection in exchange for the vast wealth in her family. However, there is no proper divorce with Iron Fan or anything like that. Despite having abilities on par with Sun Wukong, he doesn't really do anything with it. He spends his time seeking leisure, drinking and dining with friends. Even in the middle of fighting Wukong, he just abandons the battle halfway to attend a banquet. That battle started because he was enraged by Wukong's treatment of his ex-not-ex-wife, Iron Fan Princess. But now suddenly, because he had a drinking appointment, he just wasn't angry anymore. And although he was angry at Wukong over Red Boy's fate of becoming Guan Ying's subordinate, he also hasn't visited Red Boy in a few hundred years. The Bull Demon King is a classic embodiment of half-heartedness, never fully committed to anything or anyone in his life. He represents what Wukong would have become had he not been punished and undergone spiritual cultivation. Given that the Bull Demon King was once part of a brotherhood with Wukong, his defeat also symbolizes Sun Wukong leaving behind his past, his attachments to a life of frivolity and ego. This kind of compare and contrast type of storytelling was very popular in this period, so you could also extend this to other characters. For example, Shen, a Taoist deity who also matches Wukong in strength, can also be seen as the alternative version of Sun Wukong had he followed a righteous path from the beginning. And a lot of the modern interpretations of Wukong seem to still place him as a rash, violent and playful monkey who is disrespectful and carefree. But I think this mischaracterization is only accurate to the first half of the story, before Wukong shed his ego, removes his Xing, his half-heartedness, and Xingmo, inner demons. It's an unfortunate consequence of the latter parts of the novel being less memorable in the narrative, causing Wukong's character growth to be somewhat forgotten. But by this stage of the story, Wukong's temper has been greatly restrained. The tight fillet spell would not be recited again in the rest of the story. So go forward to chapter 97. The group once again encounters bandits on the road. It is a bit funny that Sha Wujing and Zhu Bajie are afraid of some mere bandits, but I guess it is what it is. Zang didn't fall from the horse, only shaking violently this time. And by this stage, Wukong is far less playful in such conflicts. Upon confirming that these were indeed bandits intent on taking their possessions, he uses his immobilization spell on the 30 bandits, binding them tightly. And he doesn't decide the bandits' punishment himself. He calls the other pilgrims over so they can hear the bandits' confession together. The thieves explain that they had not been thieves by nature, but after squandering their inheritances, they had resorted to pillaging a household the previous night. The pilgrims doesn't know this, but the thieves omitted the detail that they killed people in their raid. From our reader's perspective, capturing them would have been the right move, but the pilgrims cannot know what is not said. Although Wukong would have liked to execute the bandits, he consults Zang and ultimately releases them, intending to bring the stolen treasures back to the household. So at this point, Wukong has grown incredibly restrained, choosing to handle conflicts thoughtfully. He consults Zang for guidance and bases his actions on evidence rather than jumping to conclusions as he might have in the past. In keeping with the central theme of 西游记, the mind monkey has calmed down. And I believe you would have also noticed Zang's growth here, but let's explore a bit more. To be honest, in the novel he is probably the second most dislikable pilgrim. Zang is portrayed as someone who, born into privilege, has never had to worry about the basic struggles of life. Hunger, money, shelter, that kind of thing. Not only was he born into wealth, he is also the reincarnation of Golden Cicada, meaning he has celestial backing, at least in this current lifetime where he is destined to rejoin Buddha in heaven. During the pilgrimage, there's actually a group of celestial protectors who gives protection buffs to Zang from the sky. By the way, Golden Cicada sounds cool and might have deeper meanings like living behind the physical body as part of spiritual ascension, just like how a cicada sheds its shell, but it could also just be a stupid pun. Golden Cicada is written as 金蝉子, with Chan sounding like the Chan in Chan Buddhism. So his name could also mean the golden child of Chan. Makes sense considering how famous the historical Xuanzang is compared to other real-life scripture seekers. But Zang's background has already been established in earlier versions of 西游记, which brings a bit of contradiction in the 1592 version. Chapter 9 in particular represents a revenge plot that feels completely out of character for someone as cowardly as Zang throughout most of the novel. If we remove Chapter 9, Zang's backstory becomes rather sparse, only briefly mentioned in a poem in Chapter 12. We could perhaps say that he had experienced hardship as a child since he was thrown into the river and was raised in a monastery. But once he turned 18, he reunited with his mother, took revenge on the pirates, and turns out his father was still alive. And you can smell the amount of nepotism here that helped him become a priest at a very young age. His maternal grandfather was a chief army commander, and his father, a scholar who became Grand Secretary of the Wenyuan Chamber. Even in the revenge, Zang didn't need to lift a finger. An army was there to stamp out the pirates. Personally, I feel it's fair to leave Chapter 9 out because of Zang's Nepo baby golden child characterization. Note also that in Chapter 9, the bandits were tortured and executed to death, and Xuanzang back then didn't have anything to say about that. Double standards for a monkey, eh? Well, to elaborate on this Nepo baby characterization, to say that he was unprepared and unfit for the journey would be an understatement. He set off with only 2 disciples, and they brought almost nothing except the treasures given to them. In the first morning after they left Tang territory, Zang was impatient and rushed the group to leave too early, which indirectly led to them being captured by Yaos. And well, we never see these 2 unnamed disciples again because they got eaten immediately with graphic detail. Later, Zang is saved by Jiajing, the deity representing the planet Venus. Never mind the fact that the 2 disciples could probably be saved as well. They aren't reincarnations of important people. While continuing on the journey alone, Zang was helpless in the face of dangers around him. And here's where he was saved from tigers by a hunter called Bo Tin. Naturally, a hunter eats meat that he hunts. For example, that tiger he just hunted. In fact, that's literally what Po Qin offered to San Zang after saving him from the tiger. This mountain cat should be sufficient for a day's food for the elder, Po Qin said, with the elder referring to San Zang as an honorary title. But what did San Zang do? Let's see. He praised Po Qin as a mountain god, then followed Po Qin to walk past a slope into the mountain village, entered Po Qin's house, drank tea with the family while the tiger is being skinned and prepared for a meal, and then waited for dishes of tiger meat to be served before telling him he is vegetarian. So, yeah. So many opportunities to tell him his dietary restrictions. Clearly not someone who understands how meals are prepared. But if there is one virtue that San Zang has, is that at least as a scholar and of religious devotion, he is not that bad. Throughout the many ordeals with women trying to seduce him, he has never been moved by lust or romantic desires. And as long as his ego as representative of the pilgrimage isn't threatened, San Zang is quite a good person. But otherwise, San Zang behaves like someone who never had to struggle. All his needs, food, shelter, and even safety were provided by others, and if not by someone, some kind of divine protection or luck. Even during the journey, all he had to do was say, "Wukong, I am hungry," and food, shelter, and safety will be easily provided. So this brings me to chapter 98. Why did Buddha's disciples demand a gift before they were willing to hand over the scriptures? It's just conjecture, but it is a lesson to teach someone who has never had to worry about money what it's like to not have it. He needs to know that religious faith cannot replace the practical need for money. He needs to understand that religion cannot be that dogmatic to the point of ignoring real-world needs. Of course, we can also just accept the blacker theory that heaven is just corrupt like that. Don't ask me why Buddhist temples are all so shiny. So a key part of San Zang's growth is learning to be less idealistic, less fearful, and more pragmatic. To lessen his ego as teacher and trust his disciples, and to be less fearful and indecisive. His rigid ideals of compassion and non-violence frequently clashed with Wukong's pragmatic, though sometimes brutal actions to protect the group. In chapter 14, he rebukes Wukong for killing the robbers, which as we discussed was due to ego rather than true compassion. This then leads him to chase out Wukong in chapter 27 for killing Bai Gujing despite the latter's clear intent to harm. But this moral absolutism softens as the journey progresses. In chapter 56, San Zang expresses frustration, but only chastises and chased Wukong out when the monkey goes too far. And by chapter 82, when rescuing San Zang from a cave, Wukong proposes using the old get into the stomach trick to kill the Jiajing. Though initially against the idea, San Zang agrees when he recognized the necessity of the situation. Here, his moral absolutism has taken on nuance, without the hasty rebukes or idealistic judgment that characterized his earlier self. Also, San Zang's cowardice has certainly improved. In chapter 14, he was super cowardly, falling from his horse and paralyzed by fear. By chapter 56, he still falls down the horse in fear, but at least he was able to assess the situation and speak. And by chapter 97, he didn't fall down from the horse when seeing the robbers. By the end of the novel compilation, Tang San Zang has developed full trust in his disciples, especially Wukong. He allows Wukong to deal with the robbers, confident that the mind monkey will restrain himself and not resort to unnecessary violence. But this is trust, not free rein. Remember that the tight fillet spell can still be used, it is just not used because it is not needed. And since Xing Yuan Yi Ma comes as a pair, let's also explore Bai Long Ma, the white dragon horse's growth. Recall the part from chapter 56 where Wukong, in a playful mood, forced the white dragon horse to gallop 20 miles forward. Such scenarios occur when the mind monkey isn't being disciplined. So San Zang not falling from the horse could also be interpreted as some allegory about the wheel horse, with San Zang demonstrating better control over his fears. And San Zang's control is really core to the group down here. And when you consider that, it helps explain why Zhu Pa Jie has an underwhelming character growth. By chapter 97, the unfortunate reality is that Ba Jie still hasn't changed in his tendency to slander Wukong. When Wukong called the pilgrims over to view the immobilized bandits, Ba Jie once again accuses Wukong of sacrificing them to the bandits somehow. Sha Wujing meanwhile tries to maintain peace, urging Ba Jie to stop the nonsense. Then Zang agrees, disregarding Ba Jie's accusations. In chapter 96, as they were leaving a house, Ba Jie complained about leaving free food and lodging. And here, just look at how long Zang scolds him for. So there's a Confucian saying from the book 论语 Analysing that goes 从心所欲不逾矩. Nowadays, this is often shortened to 从心所欲 and interpreted as doing as one pleases. But the three words 不逾矩, not exceeding rules, is pretty important in the original meaning. In the context of 西游记, this saying reflects the relationship of the pilgrims by the end of the journey. The wheel horse carries Zang, the weak body, while the mind monkey leads the way. And despite the human desire to complain and crave material comforts, the weak body overcomes these desires through willpower, thus following your xin, mind, and not being ruled by desires. Yu. If you explore the full context in Analysing and are familiar with Chinese, you might also notice that these concepts resonate with themes in 西游记. For example, the saying 五十而知天命 is interesting in the context of black myth Wukong because of 天命人, and the rest of the poem is also similar to the four monkeys relating to Wukong's character growth. Personally, I also haven't truly studied this, so we'll leave them for another day. But contrast the ending relationship to chapter 27, when the pilgrims were in the mountains with no village or people in sight. Zang asks Wukong to beg for food, even scolding Wukong for being lazy when he points out that there are no village in sight. And later, while Wukong is away, the Bai Gu Jing, white-bone spirit, turns into a girl to trick the group by offering food. And well, Ba Jie is blinded by lust and food and couldn't tell that she's up to no good. When Wukong returns and kills Bai Gu Jing, it's revealed that she had been attempting to feed them maggots. Ba Jie then accuses Wukong of using magic to change the appearance of the food, which Zang believed despite logical inconsistencies in Bai Gu Jing's story. And throughout this entire chapter, Sha Wujing said nothing. This chapter is showcasing the group at its worst. Zang is unable to control any of his disciples. He's letting desires, Ba Jie, loose run free while not listening to the mind. Sha Wujing is unable to even utter a word to improve the group dynamic. So, Ba Jie is clearly a problematic character in the novel compilation. But did he at least experience growth? Fortunately, yes. Whereas in previous chapters, Ba Jie would have devoured every single grain in a house regardless of their situation, in chapter 86, after the pilgrims save a woodcutter who offers them a meal, Ba Jie actually considered the woodcutter's financial situation and politely tells him not to go overboard in expressing gratitude. In the same chapter, the pilgrims were also deceived by a Yao into believing that Zang was dead. Here, every one of the pilgrims cried. But going back to as recent as chapter 82, hearing of Zang's demise would have Ba Jie simply called for the party to split the luggage and disband. Honestly, aside from Sun Wukong, the character growth experienced by the rest is really nothing much to say. I suppose it's just one of the imperfections of the 1592 novel and an outcome of working with the already established canon of 西游记. And I believe many of you already felt more of these shortcomings in the novel compilation based on our discussion. For instance, the uneven character development of the pilgrims feel particularly unfair to Sun Wukong, given how he had to carry his useless teammates while playing the shittiest escort quest. There were also unresolved mysteries or questions. Who is the enigmatic Buti Zushi, and why did he vanish from the story entirely after training Wukong? And while Sun Wukong earns the title of Victorious Fighting Buddha, 斗战胜佛, and it is also the case that he is one of the strongest characters in the story, but in the most challenging battles, he ends up relying on other celestials to resolve these problems anyway. And this undermines his supposed might. victorious fighting Buddha? More like victorious without fighting Buddha. In addition, whether it is because CEOT was written by more than one person, or perhaps it was a classic case of author for gore, there were noticeable inconsistencies in the narrative. Like when Buddha's disciples requested a gift at the end of the journey, the pilgrims had nothing on them, but Wukong actually had a gift prepared way back in chapter 92. It literally says in the text, "We ourselves will take along one horn to present to the Buddhist patriarch at the Spirit Mountain." What happened to that? Another example, Li Tianwang, Devaraja Li in chapter 83, immediately got angry upon seeing Sun Wukong, harboring resentment over his defeat 500 years ago. But back in chapter 51, Li Tianwang happily came to Wukong's assistance. In chapter 52, he even praised Wukong's fighting prowess, saying that it reminded him of when Wukong defied the cosmic nets. He doesn't sound like he harbored any resentment then, and most of all, the worldview of the novel compilation is unacceptable when viewed through the modern lens. Most people in the novel just appear to be too much of a bastard. Even Zang, who is supposed to be a moral person, will only be seen as a nepo baby today with how he benefits from divine favour rather than demonstrating true merit. And female characters, especially antagonists, are often flat and stereotypical, reduced to roles as temptresses, villains or victims, serving only to advance the male pilgrim's journey without meaningful depth or agency. And despite these flaws, CEOT remains a masterpiece of Chinese literature, a text rich with allegory, humour and cultural significance. In the next video, we'll explore how the story continues to be retold and reimagined after 1592. It won't be as comprehensive, especially since I'm not able to watch and read every adaptation. But we'll take a closer look at how these retellings navigate or attempt to address the novel's shortcomings, and get an understanding of CEOT's evolution to today.